All right, good morning. How's it going? We're back. We're back sans headphones in sans music because my new glasses are getting pushed into my skull by my headphones and it does not feel good. And I'm having some unhappiness with my music provider. So, we're going to try it without music. If you absolutely hate this, if you think I've completely ruined the vibe, please let me know in the comments and we'll figure something out. Haircut, Fox Shadow? Yes, but like earlier this week. You just can't tell because normally I'm wearing these headphones, which I like wearing because they cover any kind of crazy cowlick situation back here. But yeah, like I said, my new glasses do not agree with them. So unless I can find some like headphone covers that like have cutouts for the glasses, if I can find some kind of headphone covers that are like only press on the back of your head or something like that, we're not going to be doing any kind of music. I mean, we'll still have sound if we need it. But how's it going? How's it going, Fox? We'll see how long we even got hair on this stream. It's not it's not looking good. You can kind of see the advancing. You can kind of see the retreat that's occurring. I don't think my lighting setup is particularly flattering. Guess you've never seen your ears, so it looks sharp. Yeah, I know. You didn't. There was really no way to know whether I even had ears up until this point. So let's re-enable this test system very briefly. Run this one time. Sharper without the headphones. All right. It makes sense because the headphones are black and they kind of just. I thought it was good as far as like the cutout with the green screen. We'll see. It feels very freeing, but it also feels like kind of uncanny to me because I don't have the background music anymore. So it's just me and like a deep silence around me. It's a little weird to be streaming like this. But we'll try it out. Give it a go. So we run this. Thanks, Bart Lane. Appreciate that. So this all seems to be working. I am getting warnings of my build, which I should probably look at. Possible null reference return on line 63. So let's look at some of these, I guess. Otherwise, we're pretty happy. Our weird little test system that thrashes the entity component system by just creating a bunch of entities, adding a bunch of components, removing a bunch of components, destroying entities, recycling entities. Seems to be working. It's like a simple but fairly thorough test. And we figured out a bunch of bugs yesterday that were causing cross chunk boundary issues. So hopefully we never have to talk about chunks ever again. Because now they work, and so we're never going to touch this system again if we can avoid it. Uh, yeah, we're storing and moving around the entities just fine. Their archetypes are changing. Seems good. Seems to be good. I think we maybe want to change a couple things about how we print them. Let's look at those build errors. So line 63, component type. This print value. Possible null reference return. Ah, I see. Just add this. We just allow for the possibility of a null string. Solves that. You're not saying the headphones look bad, just that you didn't realize what the difference was that you were seeing at first. Oh yeah, no, for sure. No worries. We'll see. I'm thinking about getting rid of all this. Just cue balling it. I don't mind being bald. I just don't want to go bald. I don't want to like fight that fight. So maybe we'll get out ahead of it. We'll see. My ears feel better. My skull feels better. I feel like I was getting an indentation on the side of my head from those headphones pushing my glasses into my skull. Music is really, the lack of music is bothering me. It's bothering me. Hopefully it's not bothering anyone else. But I think it is getting me to just talk more, maybe, to prevent dead air time, because the only thing I hear is like my own voice. So we'll see. Your buddy said the same thing and just shaved it all. It looks great. Yeah, that's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping that would be the result. All right, so that's one build issue. Let's look at a couple of these. Input, I don't really care about input. We haven't even started looking at that game. Consider adding the required modifier or declaring the field as nullable. It should definitely be required. Both of these should be required. Archetype.disposed is never used. That's because we don't really get rid of our archetype, do we? We should probably add a dispose on the archetype. But maybe we don't need it because the chunk list actually handles its own disposal. When it removes chunks, it disposes. I guess we need to handle the case of like if we get rid of an archetype even if it's still populated. I don't know. It's all managed memory right now, so I'm not going to care about disposal. So the biggest thing was you feel temperatures on your head more. You feel the heat of ceiling lights. That's hilarious. I've definitely gotten some comfy beanies for this winter. I'll definitely become a hat guy. I'll be wearing hats like all the time. That's what you got to do. All right, game. Let's look at these two game lines, 8 and 13. Main system, private main system, main system. Why is this a problem? Oh, we don't have a constructor. So can I just say required? Is that a thing? Required member di game.main system cannot be less visible or have a setter less visible than the corresponding type, than the containing type di.game. Fascinating. I don't even know what that means. Is it because we don't have a constructor here? Well, whatever. I don't know how to use that keyword. Non-nullable field is uninitialized. I guess we can just make a new main system here. I wanted to wait and not, I didn't want to do this in the constructor. I wanted to do this on ready I guess. Because I wanted to like gate the initialization, but maybe we don't care. Public node board, get private set. Oh, maybe we just don't care. Let's just live with these errors. We're initializing this stuff in ready. The Godot engine is taking care of that for us. We're gonna ignore those. We're gonna ignore those errors. Warnings. They're warnings, not errors. We can ignore them safely. All right, let's disable the test system because we don't need it anymore. So we'll just stop running the test system. We don't really need this ready function anymore either. Unless we want to initialize these in the ready function instead of just when they're constructed. I'm not really sure how we want to do that. So the next thing we're going to do is set up some systems that can operate on entity data. So I guess we do still need the test system because the test system is going to be the thing that creates the thing for testing some of our systems here. So should we make another system that's like the move system? Let's make a move system. So our first test of our systems, we've done the entity component stuff. So let's do the system stuff. So we're just going to grab everyone's position. We're just going to have a query that gets all entities with positions. Let's do this. Let's grab all entities with positions and directions and move them by their direction. We'll move their position by their direction. I think that'll be a good test. So this is a public sealed class move system. You implement iSystem. iSystem is just public void run. You're going to be void run with a double delta time. The iSystem just requires we implement run. Yeah, double delta time. We can also implement run without the delta time. What if I don't implement the delta time? What if I just leave this empty and I try to call it from the main system? Is that fine? I feel like we're not implementing, we have missing members or something here, but it's not being enforced. One usage, one implementation, main system run. Okay, so this is the only implementation. It's here. This doesn't count as an implementation. Does it count as an implementation if I do this though? Is this an implementation now? Okay, now it counts as an implementation. Weird that iSystem wasn't enforcing the usage of this on this. You'd think it would. All right, so we need to make a query. So we're going to have a query. We want to cache the query. So we're going to have a query that basically says I am all. Bartlane's asking when the Digital Iliad branded beanie line hitting the market. That is not a terrible idea. I think I would enjoy that. We'd need like a threaded version of my logo, which would maybe be hard. A lot of bald programmers out here. That is true. That is true. We're in good company. I'll just be like a worse version of Randy. The audio stream's current bitrate. Hold on, I'm getting a complaint from the YouTube studio system here. The audio stream's current bitrate 0 is lower than the recommended bitrate. We recommend that you use an audio stream bitrate of 128 kilobits per second. How's my audio right now? YouTube is saying we have an audio bitrate of 0. Is there audio? Okay, it seems like I've got audio. Maybe we lost audio for a little bit. Thanks, YouTube. Thank you for panicking me about nothing. All right, so we need a query. The query is going to go through all the archetypes, find the archetypes that include the position that we're asking for, or the component that we're asking for, or multiple components. Find all the archetypes that contain them, and then it's going to have some kind of data structure that it returns that's going to be like all of the chunks in that archetype. It'll just cache the archetypes, or maybe it'll cache the chunks. I don't know. I guess it'll cache the chunks, or the archetypes. And then we need to get the chunks from the chunk list. If we just get the chunk list, we don't need to account for the possibility of adding and removing chunks. We can just have a list of chunks. That we could cache. And then the way we're going to actually read the data is we're just going to use component type read-only span or read-write span, which will just give us a span for each chunk. So we'll just go through each span and we'll just keep making spans. And we'll go through each chunk. This is for linear operating over data. We have entity-specific commands like, you know, destroy entity, create entity, set component, add component, remove component. Those take an entity ID. Those are like those are for like out of order operations. Now we need the in order process for actually doing this stuff. So in the run function, we're going to ask some kind of system-like query. So maybe we make a query object. What is query reference to? Okay, so in C# query there's a queryable. So maybe we just make a query class. And we put a lot of this functionality here. It's a query. Maybe we have a dictionary that maps queries to component compositions. Because it's kind of nice. Sometimes the way you'd implement this, you'd actually have like many versions of the request. You'd have like, here's a query with one component. Here's a query with 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever. You'd use like, you could use like code generation to like make that work. But for us, we can define compositions just with bit flags. So we can just pass a bit flag and be like, this is the query that corresponds to this bit flag. So the game world can be responsible for the query. It can have a dictionary of queries. Get query doesn't feel like the best word for this. So what would be the word for like when we query something? It'd be like ask query. No, that's redundant. It could just be a void query, and it could just be like request query or something like that. I don't know. Let's look this. Let's look at what we want to do for this. We could say inquire. That seems stupid. Be receive query. Kind of like inquire. Whatever. Let's not worry about the functionality right now. Let's set up the structure. All right. So we're gonna have a dictionary. It may be private. It should probably be private. We can call it like private, read only, rad only, read only, dictionary. And it will be, the key will be a composition, and the return will be a query. I don't love that word for this, but it's the most common one in an ECS, so it's the one I'm gonna. It's the one I'm gonna do. So we can have queries by composition. That seems fine. So our queries by composition. So we can use a similar system for like when we are getting a, let's just say get query. I don't think set query is a thing that makes sense, but we don't have a set archetype either. So get query is kind of like get archetype. We can have create query too, and that'll be like an internal thing. So we'll have an internal create query. Yeah, we'll create a query using a composition. Right now we'll just say return new query with the composition. We'll this here. We'll have a public query Why do I not know how to do a? I'm always doing primary constructors. Like not the best explicit constructors. Archetype. Oh, so you only okay, I see. Get this out of here. So public sealed class query. Don't need this thing. So we need some, what's going to be on this query? We're going to have, so let's store our composition. It makes sense to store. I put the constructor before the properties. Yeah, I do. Okay. Currently want a primary constructor, but we might eventually. Actually, we probably do just want a primary constructor. What does the query need to keep track of? So the query needs to keep track of. There needs to be like a dirty flag or something, so we know when we need to update the query. I don't know. That's probably not what we're gonna do. But we do need to know when we're gonna update it, because this is the sort of thing. If we're tracking archetypes, we need to know when an archetype is created. We also need to know. We may or may not need to know. It depends. We can cache this in two ways. There's like the obvious cache, which is like, here are all the archetypes that correspond to your query. And there's an even better one, which is like, here are the chunk lists that correspond to your query. And then there's an even better one, which is like, here are all the chunks that correspond to your query. The chunks one is the hardest one to maintain, but it's probably the most performant for iteration. The chunk list one is good. Probably cache all of this. Well, we don't need to do the chunk list one. We can cache archetypes, and then we can also cache chunks. But then we'll need to know the difference between a structural change, where like an archetype has been added or removed, versus a internal archetype change, which is like we've increased our number of chunks. It's surprising I don't do more planning before I start my stream. All right. So let's think about this the same way we do archetypes. So when we do a get archetype call, we try get the value for the composition out of the archetype. And we either just return that or we create the archetype. So let's do a similar thing here. Oop, what did I just do? Public query, get query, composition. Do it live. Hey, Smooth in a second. Dan Brinkman, do you need to cache it? No, it just seems good. Because I think it'll be expensive to traverse our whole list of archetypes all the time. Dan Brinkman, how expensive is it to get all the matching archetypes and just iterate through them? I don't know. That is the question. That is a good question to ask. We should be careful we're not prematurely optimizing this, because like the common wisdom is that you do cache the queries. Like caching the queries is just good. Like let's go look at Flex, because Flex does this. Flex. Flex is a great system for this stuff. So queries, they can be cached, uncached, or a mix of both. We need to support things like and, or, not operators, and optional operators. So let's look at the caching. But that's a really good point. That's a good point, Dan. How many archetypes are there? It's a finite number because we know, well, we know the number of component types. We don't necessarily know every possible combination of them, but I would assume that we have like 100 component types, maybe like somewhere in the hundreds, low hundreds number of component types at the most. Like our components are small. We're aiming to keep our components small. Like a vector 4 is like probably like the ideal size of a component. So we'll have a bunch of them. And then archetypes, we'll get kind of combinatoric. So there's definitely trade-offs for caching. So here's some of the trade-offs for caches. So interestingly, Flex supports both cached and uncached queries. And asks the question, if cache queries are so fast, why even bother with uncached queries? 4 main reasons. Cache queries are really fast to iterate, but take more time to create because the cache must be initialized first. Cache queries have a higher RAM utilization, whereas uncached queries have very little overhead and are stateless. That's nice. That is nice. Cache queries add overhead to archetype creation deletion, as these changes have to get propagated to caches. That's true. That is something we need to keep in mind. While caching archetypes is fast, some query features require matching individual entities, which are not efficient to cache and aren't cached. That's interesting. I'm not sure about matching individual entities to a cache, but this is something we probably shouldn't optimize too much early on. Yeah, as a rule of thumb, if you have a query that's evaluated each frame, which is the typical case, they will benefit from being cached. If you need to create a query ad hoc, an uncached query makes more sense. Yeah, so it's like if it is a query that's like our move system, which is just like a system that like increments positions by velocities or directions or whatever, that kind of thing you want to cache because you want to generate that every frame. But if you have like a much rarer cache or a much rarer query that's like a more structural query, that's something that's run very rarely, yeah, don't cache that. Okay, so here are the 4 kinds of caches that Flex uses. They have default, okay, whatever. Auto, cache query terms that are cacheable. All, require that all query terms are cached. None, no caching. So what do you mean by terms? Yeah, so query features that return entire archetypes can be cached, whereas features that return individual entities cannot be cached. I don't know why we would ever want to just return individual entities from a query, but that's a different case that we probably don't need to consider. Rematching. Oh, we might need to do this. Something about storing empty archetypes from non-empty archetypes. It's reassuring to know that Flex supports empty archetypes because, like, I don't want to delete archetypes that aren't being used because it's likely that they will be used again soon. So we do need to consider storing empty archetypes. Dan says, actually, I'm ready for the wisdom. because you seem to know your stuff. You ask the good questions, the good rhetorical questions that I should be asking myself. Dan says, I guess if you just want matching archetypes, aka contains these components, this shouldn't be that bad. No, it shouldn't. That should be easy. The tougher caching would be if we want to either cache the chunk lists that correspond. So it's like which parts of this archetype correspond to these. Actually, that's as trivial as caching archetypes. So the easy caching would be cache archetypes, cache the chunk lists that are for like the components that actually, match our query. That's easy. I think we could do that pretty reasonably. The much more hardcore cache thing to cache would be to cache references to the actual chunks, which actually we probably don't want to do because chunks are passed by value. No, okay, so we don't want to cache chunks. Chunks are passed by value. So let's start with that. Let's start with caching the archetypes that are involved, maybe the chunk lists that directly correspond to it. So we could have a list of chunk lists instead of caching the archetypes. I mean, we want to cache the archetypes because we want to know about them. But what the system will probably iterate over would be chunk lists from the chunk list of lists. It's not great. That's a lot of indirection. But I don't think we want to store the actual chunks, because that's too wild. Because then we have to worry about when like chunks fill up and you add a chunk to a list. We don't want to know. We don't want to know about that on the query level. We'll just eat the cost of that. If it becomes a problem, we'll look at optimizing that. We're not going to have huge entity numbers and huge archetype numbers. This is like this is a somewhat limited scoped game. It's not enormous. Like there will probably be like half a dozen ships that are being considered at any one time. Each ship probably consists of hundreds or thousands of entities. So we're going to have entity counts in like the low tens of thousands. Maybe let's just say we're going to have 5-figure entity counts. Entity component systems really don't start to get bogged down, I don't think, until you get into unless the components are big, so the chunk utilization is low. If the components are big and chunk utilization is low, then a lower number of components can be annoying. But yeah, at our scale, I don't think we're even going to notice. Just keep it simple then. You got it, Dan. It's always good when we have like an optimization devil on our shoulder who is like, why are we making this optimization already when we don't even have performance characteristics? Part of it is like we're kind of just going off of like what the common wisdom is for when you make an entity component system. It's like you just do these things when you have an entity component system, but it's like that's the general solution. We have a specific use case. Let's be specific. So get query will be easy. Get query is kind of like this, where you just go return. Yeah, so return queries by composition. Yeah, this. You try to get the value. If you can't get the value, this should be query, not queries. This dictionary should be query by composition. Oops. Because we're returning a single query. We're not returning multiple queries. There should only be one query for each composition. So now we need to implement create query. Create query should be a private function. Oh, we have it. Okay. So we already just say return new query. That's obviously too simple. Sorry, my partner is ill. All right. So when we create, so we'll say, we're just kind of at the moment just aping our archetype workflow because they're similar to archetypes where like, we're not going to delete queries just because the query doesn't return anything. We'll keep the query around. We'll have a one query for each composition. I wonder if we want to like more directly tie the queries to the compositions if that's the case. Because we have one archetype per composition, one query per composition. Composition right now is a fairly lightweight. Oh, is composition a struct? Composition might be a struct. In which case we don't want to do much. Oh yeah, composition is a struct. Okay. Yeah. Composition is really just a bit flag or a bit field, you know, whatever. Set of flags. It's really lightweight. It's super useful. Very powerful for us. Means we don't have to like, I was saying it earlier, we don't have to have like a query that takes one component, a query that takes two components. Like we don't need a bunch of function overloading. And we don't need to send like a array of args or whatever. We can just send them a bit flag and like we just scrutinize the bit flag. Do we have a has function? If not, component flags dot has flag. We should do it. We should have a has component function on the composition. Do we not have that? Oh, we do. Has component. Component flags dot has flag component flag. I don't know if I like calling it component flag more than type flag, but I don't think I care. Maybe we just call it type flags. So that's kind of what we call it everywhere else. Let's find all cases component flag. In this, I'm having a hard time finding the replace. Whatever. This is not what we should be doing, but it's the kind of thing that we do. Component type dot flags type flag. I like that better. It's just shorter, and it still communicates what we're talking about. All right, so we have our really nice lightweight composition struct, and we use that to look up archetypes. We use that. We tie each composition struct, possible one that we actually use, is tied to an archetype and it's tied to a query. So when we create a query, we just say new query composition. We add it, query by composition, and then we return query. That is as simple as it needs to be for now. Can it be even simpler where you say something like return query by position.add? uh, all right, so we're making our query. The query itself, let's start filling this out. So the query has a composition associated with it. It needs a list of archetypes. Public list of archetypes. It's like matching archetypes, something like that. Probably just say archetypes. I feel like it's implied that they're matching archetypes. So we'll figure all of this out when we construct the query, yeah? But we'll want this to be a function so that we can reconstruct it. So let's make like we'll make a private function for now. Private void match archetypes. So for doing this, we're gonna need to go through. This is gonna be interesting. Okay, so this is gonna just do some bitwise stuff. We're gonna do some bitwise stuff here. That's how we do this. I will do that. Thanks, Smooth, in a second. All right, message communicated. All right. So yeah, we're gonna iterate through the world. So what are the current ways we get archetypes? We just say get archetype normally. So that's fine. The problem is get archetype is not sufficient for this because get archetype wants to match the composition exactly. So we almost need like a match archetype function here in the world. So let's do that. Let's put that here. So we'll say, are we going to just give them a whole list of archetypes? I feel like calling it get archetypes plural and then passing a composition is confusing because get archetypes singular works very differently than get archetypes plural. I feel like I would be better served by doing like a match archetypes, but I don't know. This is also just my code. This doesn't need to be like an API that like other people use. So I don't think we need to go crazy. As Dan said, just keep it simple then. Smiley face. And that's what we'll do. Still feels weird not having headphones on. So what are we gonna do? We just gonna iterate through the values of the archetype by composition thing? Oh, wait. We can do this with graph edges. We already have the graph edges that let us get from one archetype to another based on like adding and removing components. So what if we just got the archetype that was the simplest, that had like the first or primary component? So you just say, give me the archetype with this component. And then you ask that archetype, you use the graph. Well, what if the graph edges fail? I guess that's how we make the graph edge system better. It's the same thing as if we were adding or removing components. We would just have to do the search once, whether we're talking about queries or we're talking about adding and removing or creating entities. That's actually maybe really good because we have a graph edge system that makes it really easy to jump from one to another. So like each archetype has a dictionary that matches flags, sets of flag. Why is this flags? Component type dot flags. Is this supposed to be an individual flag? Is there a reason we don't have this be a specific flag? Hmm. Kind of don't love static di.component type. I kind of like having to say component type dot flags. I feel like we're going to have other flags at some point and it'll be confusing if we don't do this. So we get the graph edges. Okay, let's try this. This seems like an easy way to do it. Then we have a similar process to this, which is our process for... We should encapsulate this functionality. It'd be called like get archetype. What would it be called? It would be an archetype function. It would be like... Oh, but it needs to talk back and forth with the world because we potentially need to create an archetype. Oh, no, we just call get archetype. We can just call that on the world. Let's encapsulate this functionality. So we could call it like archetype like with component and like without component. So we could say destination archetype equals source archetype dot with component, or we could say dot without component. Let's do that. Let's do that. Again, I have mixed feelings about how like OOP the administrative code is for the entity component system, but I think at a certain point that's just what we get because we're writing this way and it's the easiest way to do it, and we're writing this in C#. It's just weird. It feels weird to mix the two. Feels weird to mix a very data oriented entity component system with a very object oriented governing structure. But maybe it also doesn't matter. It's possible that it doesn't matter. So we're going to say public void, we're going to say public archetype with component. And we'll just share a component type dot flags. Should we just send a component type? Is that better than sending the flags thing? Component type is a class. That's not as good as sending either the flag by itself or a composition. But I don't like using the word composition for just a single flag, but I guess that's what it is, huh? That is kind of what it is. I just don't like plugging in component type flags when we mean just a single flag. But we can make that very clear in the parameter. We just call it type flag, and it's like very obviously one flag. So maybe that's okay. Maybe we don't care. Where were we? We were in the archetype. So we were going to do with component, and it was going to component type dot flags type flag. And then let's just copy over this function. So instead, so we can get rid of source archetype. Don't need that. We just say we need to declare a variable archetype with component. Call it that. This is pretty snazzy, I think. It simplifies some code that we were repeating. Oh, this is for remove component. This one is without component. Just get rid of the references from the source archetype because we are the source archetype. This function name is maybe a little too short, just without component. I think it's confusing because up here we have copy entity with component. Maybe we should just fully articulate this name. Get archetype without component. Then we just return archetype without component. Seems pretty good. We're in ads, so I'll try not to do anything, too crazy here. This should just work, and this should make our graph edges system really good, like really, really useful beyond just entity movement. Okay, so let's also write get archetype with component. So pretty much, let's see how, we're going to try to write this out and see if JetBrains fills it in for us. Kind of curious. This might not work because yeah, it's not, I don't think it's looking later, further on in the project. So let's just copy this over. I think if we wrote these in the reverse order, the auto complete would like have helped us a lot more. So we'll just specify with instead of without. And then instead of remove, we're switching to add. This is remove. Well, This doesn't totally work though, because like we need to account for third party. Maybe this isn't the right approach. I mean, this is already a useful function because we can actually use this in a couple of other places, but actually maybe this doesn't work for our strict purpose here. But this is still good, so let's use it in a couple of places. So instead of here, we can say variable dst archetype equals source archetype dot get archetype without component type flag. I mean, that's cleaner already. That's kind of just nice. I don't know why I hesitated or why it took so long to encapsulate that functionality, but we can also do this up here. Thought we could do this in two places. I guess if we're only doing this in one place, having it be a function is kind of stupid, but whatever. Maybe the graph edges aren't necessary. I mean, I like our graph edges system, but maybe we can do this a different way. Block attack. Black attack. Hello, how goes the dev process? It's going good. It's going good. We're actually pretty far into an entity component system that we're making, just a lightweight entity component system. We have all the basic functionality like creating and recycling entities and adding and removing components and all that stuff. We're working on the query system, which is the system that lets our systems just get all of the entities that correspond to a specific set of components. That's what we're working on today. How are you doing? Happy Friday. I should probably call this try get archetype because it can fail. But I feel like try get should return a bool, so maybe not. So we're going to get a query. We either succeed with our try get based on a composition, or we create the query. So creating the query. You don't usually watch Twitch. You've been watching people develop in Godot mostly. We are in Godot, so you're welcome here. You've started making a few things, and it's a lot of fun. Your normal work is video, motion graphics, graphic design. That's awesome. So it's a nice change of pace. I enjoy what you've done so far with coding and game dev. That's really cool. My partner's actually getting into motion graphics and graphic design stuff. She's studying it in grad school. But you're getting out of that, or you're just doing games on the side, is what you're doing. I think Godot is great. I think Godot is great for individuals. I think it's great for people who aren't like the most technically minded, but it's still very powerful for those who are. Yeah, it's on the side. Nice. All right. So yeah, we have a couple different ways here how we want to get arbitrary archetypes. I thought we could use the graph edges system because we can just be like, oh, give me this archetype, but with this component. Give me archetype with this component. The problem is it's still exact. It's still only gonna give us archetypes with exactly that composition. But the problem is the whole point of the query is that you get archetypes that at least include this composition. It may include others, but it at least includes this. So graph edges won't work for this, but that's okay. That's okay. I'm still glad we kind of figured this out this way. You're between jobs, so you've had a little more time to play with it and you like it. It's fun for you to watch people that do it more than I do. Yeah, that's awesome. We're kind of deep in the C sharp side of it, so we're not really doing a lot on the other side, but I can kind of show you what kind of stuff we're working with. Uh, Whatever, return new, just to get rid of that compiler error. So we're working on kind of like an isometric FTL-like kind of deal, like a kind of an isometric 3D kind of spaceship simulator kind of game. That's the kind of thing we're trying to work on. At the moment, we really just have a set of tools that we're building out, so we're still really early. The most advanced of these tools is our auto tiling tile placement system that lets us build like 3D objects out of our tile set. That's an isometric tile set. So this is my own auto tiler, custom auto tiler. It does like some outlining stuff that I like. And so here's like a top deck. We can start adding like walls, and so we can start adding walls here. We could go down another level, add another one. It's got a compartmentalization system, so it can tell. So like this room is sealed. So it's this light, so it can tell it's sealed because it's got this ceiling here. This room is not sealed. We can rotate this stuff because it doesn't have a ceiling, so we can add a ceiling. Seal it. We can add doors. We can add single doors, double doors, eventually even triple doors. Right now, triple doors kind of breaks the system, but I have a triple door design that I want to implement. So let's add like an airlock here maybe. So we got a little airlock kind of deal. Got some visibility issues we're trying to address. Thank you. I really appreciate that. You used C# when you were using Unity. You like that language too. Thank you. Yeah, we're kind of. I'm not like the most graphically minded person. This is kind of my first foray into doing game art. But we're just building. We're just building complex stuff out of small pieces, and that I can do. That I can do. I don't think I can really. Like, this is the biggest piece of art I've made. But once you get an auto tiler involved, it becomes like really easy. You don't have to do it all yourself, you know. You just need to make the little components and you make something that combines them together. All right, so we need to think of a different way of getting archetypes that match this composition. It would be cool if, I guess the query is literally the cached representation of this. So we don't need a separate representation. So let's, what in the hell is going on here? So we'll say variable archetypes, this new list, return archetypes. And then in between here is where the magic happens. So let's just go like 4 for each. Let's just go for each archetype in archetype.compositions.values. Do I need to? No. So for each value in the archetype by composition, which is just our full list of values, we just need, how do we do this? So maybe we need some compositional. Okay, then I know what we do. I know what we do. So then we say for each variable component in composition, if we need to break out of this into the next thing. So we need like a bool, I guess. You see like variable is match or matching. Say this isn't matching. What made me choose C# over GDScript? We still use GDScript. The whole auto tiler tool I showed you, that is all written in GDScript. That whole thing is GDScript. That's this whole big thing over here. Plus a few other things. It's not just this script. It's probably mostly this script. So I like GDScript. I've done whole jam games in just GDScript. The thing is, our game is kind of simulation heavy. So we are kind of splitting our code base. You didn't know you could have both in the same project? Yeah, you totally can. I don't necessarily want them to talk to each other a ton because there's a cost. There's a cost to talking between C# and the Godot API. Like, part of what's great about GDScript is it's like very tightly coupled to the game engine. So what I'm doing for my game is basically everything that is directly being rendered or is like a UI element, which I guess is also being rendered. So basically like node 2Ds, control nodes, stuff like that. Like anything that's actually on screen, which we're going to put in like our board and our UI section. So here's like a simple archetype of like, or a simple outline of like the structure of the main game scene. Everything that's on in the world that's like a game piece will be in the board. Everything that's a UI element will be in the UI. We have this game node, which is like the master node. This is in C#. So the game node is in C#. And this is like our root node. And this node is the only node written in C sharp. It has the hooks into ready and like physics process and stuff like that. And so this node has a main system, which is like our basic ECS system. So this main system will have a bunch of children systems, and it will just run those, and it will pass along like the delta time and stuff like that. So all of the game data is going to exist in this thing called the world, which is a sealed class that's owned by the game. So the game owns a world. So all of the simulated game data is here. It's not backed by nodes. It doesn't exist in the scene tree. It only exists here. And so it's very lightweight because it's being stored in this entity component system. And so we can do a lot of simulating without ever touching the scene tree. And then stuff that needs to be rendered or interacted with, at the end of each simulation step, we can synchronize it with the nodes that do exist that represent the the simulation units that actually like the game pieces that need to exist in the real world. But it's all going to be determined by the game world. It's kind of a way, I mean, you should generally try to separate your rendering and your game data. But it's hard to do sometimes because, if you're just here in Godot and you've just got all of your nodes in the scene tree, then maybe a bunch of your scenes are off screen, in which case maybe you can unload the scene. But maybe you want those scenes to continue simulating. Like maybe stuff continues to happen. And you can do a whole bunch of stuff to like make that work. You could simulate it like a... Yeah, it's okay. Apologies. Um, so you could do a whole bunch of things to get around that. You could do like a more like a less fine grained simulation on like those. You could do all sorts of stuff, but we're just avoiding the whole problem. We're just not having our simulation data in the scene tree unless it's being represented, and in which case it's only being represented for the purpose of rendering or UI picking, like for interaction with the UI, like mouse pickable objects and stuff like that. And all of the simulation stuff is being handled on the very lightweight, pure entity component data representation. So it's kind of cool. As to why I picked C sharp, there isn't a good answer for that because C sharp is actually not the best language to write an entity component system in. I would have been better off writing this in C++, but I am not a particularly gifted programmer, and I have not done a lot in C++, so I'm a lot more familiar with C sharp, probably because like you, I did a lot of stuff in Unity for a long time. So I felt like I could do this in C sharp. Thank you for the follow. Really appreciate that. So that's what we're doing. All right, so the way we're doing this, I don't know why it's trying to autofill this. This is very wrong. So what we're going to say is if archetype dot has dot archetype dot has archetype. Do we not have an archetype has flag? Is it just a composition? Maybe we need an includes function. We could have a contains or includes. Let's do a contains. Public bool contains composition. We can return. We can say for each composition. We can say for each component in composition. We can say if if our composition, we're going to say if not composition dot has flag component. I thought I had a has flag function on the composition. Do I call that something else? Oh, we call it has component. That makes way more sense. So we say has component. We can say if composition dot has component, or if it doesn't. So if it doesn't, we just return false immediately. Otherwise, if we get through this whole list, we return true. That's an easy way to do it, right? So if any of the flags in this composition are not included in our composition, we just say we don't contain this. Maybe we should call this includes. Maybe that's better. Includes. I like contains because it feels like it's encompassing. Like contains to me implies that it like fully has every single thing. Like it is at least as big, if not bigger, than the thing that we're checking to see if we contain it. It's a little weird because it's not a. I like contains. We're sticking with contains. Maybe we'll have another function that includes that just takes a specific component flag. Well, this one contains an entire composition and would actually work. We could pass a single flag in as the composition. I feel like it's a little heavy-handed to pass a single flag in place of a composition, and it's a little confusing, so we're not going to do that here, but contains should be sufficient for us. So we're just going to go back here. We're going to say, so we don't actually have to do this anymore. We don't need this loop, so we don't need this matching statement. And then so we just say for each archetype and archetype by composition.values, we say if archetype dot contains composition archetypes dot add archetype. GG easy. Hey Shrippy, how's it going? Have I ever heard of a game called Snatcher for the Sega CD? I've heard of it, but I'm not super familiar with it. Can't say I'm familiar with it. Are you kind of a retro gamer? Oh, this looks good. It's a cyberpunk graphic adventure game developed and published by Konami. Written and designed by Hideo Kojima and first released in 1988. I have definitely heard of this, Snatcher. I feel like I've heard Tim Rogers talk about this game quite a bit. It's cool. Why are you bringing this up? Are you playing it? I feel like Tim Rogers would have talked about this during either or both their cyberpunk video and their Boku no Natsu Yasame video. Probably mostly cyberpunk. I'm sure there's like 10-minute segment on this. This looks cool. It's like a graphic adventure. Oh, that was not appropriate what I just showed on screen. Okay, we're just going to glance over that. Wikipedia has some raw game art on here. I hope nobody notices that. That looked like a violent game, but very cool. You think I'd like the art? Yeah, I definitely like the art. I love pixel art. That was pretty great pixel art. You literally just saw the intro a while ago. I haven't seen the intro. Maybe I'll go watch it on YouTube later. All right, so we've got our query. So we get the query, we create the query. In the query, we have this match archetypes function, which I think we just, so if we cache this, so what we should do on the world, we should also have a queries by archetype. So private, read only, dictionary, integer, not integer, what am I talking about? Archetype, queries, list of queries. This is queries by archetype. So we're gonna need, if we're gonna implement caching, we need this. You're certainly inspired by it. Yeah, it looked really cool. So we need this queries by archetype because we need to be able to look at an archetype. And this way, if an archetype has changed, anonymous gifter, gifting the 1 month tier 1 sub to block attack. That's too kind, anonymous gifter. You've been gifted. Oh yeah, we got that. Look at that badge. Look at that sub badge. Well, enjoy enjoy skipping the ads. And also the bounty of emotes that you have access to. They're just little emotes I make each time I do a game jam. I like make a set of emotes. I've only made a couple game jams while streaming. But you can now ship it. Hey, still needs work. Good to see you. How are the holidays treating you? Oh yeah, yeah. Mail time is great. Mail time is from our last game jam. It's a little 3D racer inspired by Wheelie Yellow, the incredible YouTube series Wheelie Yellow. You're doing pretty good. I'm glad to hear that. It's been a minute. We're trying a musicless stream today. The game was pretty cute. I appreciate that. No one's ever going to play it because I could never get the web build version working. Ever. So, it's fine. I'm happy with it. We ended up doing like a PS1 aesthetic, which I thought was pretty cool. Maybe one day I will. Yeah, I don't know. It wasn't just I couldn't get it to work. It's that the lighting was completely broken. I'd have to figure that out. I'd have to figure out why the lighting was completely broken on it. But I'm still sitting on a remastered version of my first jam game that's like 95% done and just needs tutorials and some balancing, and I've never gotten around to it. Maybe I'll do that over the holidays as like a treat to myself. Finish a remaster of my first game jam this year. I spent like 2 months on the remastered version, and then I just put it away and haven't looked at it. Oh well, let's get through this first. Let's have a fully functional entity component system before we think about anything else. Let me know if you find the lack of music disturbing, but for a number of reasons, we've decided to go without music. This is a trial stream. It's super weird for me not to have background sound. It's just me and my voice, and it's kind of alarming. As somebody who's usually listening to something or watching something, kind of weird to just be sitting with my own silence and my own voice. Shrippy, you haven't done P1 aesthetic. You usually aim for PS2 era. Oh, yeah, for sure. We did it because we ended up doing this 3D down res. We did this like down res 3D look that was very pixelated. I can kind of show you for a minute, I guess. I'm not really doing anything. Let me know if this is too loud. You could never without background music. Yeah, I'm hoping that people that are watching, I mean, if they're on their phone, it's kind of tough, but I'm hoping that people that are watching, if they want background music, they just play their own music. Some streamers end up doing that, like Armus. I know a bunch of streamers like will listen to music themselves, but won't broadcast it, and will encourage their viewers to like also listen to their own music. But yeah, this is a little driving game. This is the source of that little emote. But yeah, we made this in 72 hours, and this is my first 3D Godot game. It's pretty cool. There's traffic. Oh, I immediately died. There's pedestrians and car traffic. Sound is good. That's good. Gotta watch out for this red car here. Oh. Yeah, you go around and you drop off these packages at these little drop-off zones, and you're this tiny little, you're wheelie yellow, making your little deliveries. Let's go into an alleyway. Shrippy, you like the focus of no music while you're working? Unless it's just organizing a repetitive task. I think music tricks your brain. That's more happening. Yeah, no, I definitely have that problem where like I'll make a mistake and I'll like watch a TV show that I just put on in the background, and then I like get really engrossed in it. I love the shock physics on the mail truck. Yeah, this is vehicle body 3D. This is pretty much, I mean, I heavily tuned it, but this is just a built-in node type. It handles the forces on the wheels for you. It's pretty good. Oh, cat. Woo! That could have killed me. Smooth in a second. This was fun to play. You heard the web build is busted. Is there a downloadable version? Yeah, there is. There is. No, it's not still 2-button. I added controller support. I added controller support with an unlocked input system. So there was some post-processing to get that PS1 look. It's literally just a sub-viewport that it just reduces the rendering, the final screen render, to a 180 pixel tall render texture. It's just sub-viewport. Like there's no shaders or anything at work. The Godot viewport system is so strong. I'll send you the link, Smooth. I'll post the itch link. It's got the post jam version on it. My record is just under 10 minutes to beat the game. All right, I'm gonna crash into something. Oh, that didn't do it. All right, let's find a car. Witness me. Is this based off that little video about the little postal driver? Exactly, Shrippy. Yeah, that's Wheelie Yellow. Here's the itch page. Witness me. So what? It's a full res game scaled to a small viewport size. Yeah, it's full HD. It's a fully HD game. I didn't do the assets. It's their asset packs. I credit them in the video, or I credit them in the game. But yeah, that was a nice diversion. Yeah, hopefully someday I can get a web build of that game working. That'd be nice. I'd have to ask some people who are more familiar with Godot than I am why the lighting model is so busted when I try to do a web build. All right, where were we? Getting queries, generating queries. Do I want to match archetypes or do I want just like a constructor? I guess we want both because we want to be able to rematch or update or something like that. We do like an update. Maybe we say like rematch. Or we have a private like match archetypes function. We say something like, how do we do this? I just wrote a bunch of functionality for this, and now everything I thought of is out of my brain, is like gone out of my brain. So we make a new query, we add it, and that's it for that. I just added some functionality for this. Oh, get archetypes. This is it. This needs to be way higher up. I feel like we should have a different way of referring to this. Right now, this is just get archetypes. I don't know. Whatever. Who cares? We'll come up with a better way of referring to this later. I get preoccupied with naming. I think most programmers do. But there's a fairly ancient way of feeling like names hold power, and like naming things gives you some kind of like knowing something's name gives you some like, you know, power over it. That's like an ancient human sensibility. It's the power of names. So I don't think it's that weird that we kind of obsess about it. Oh, it's this simple. It's just get archetypes. You plug in a composition. We just find if an archetype contains this composition. So if it contains all of the... So we'll want a better system. What we probably should do is have like... maybe like a static, like a series of static... No, it can't be static, can it? Maybe we have something like match all or match any or something like that. That doesn't really work for... I'm gonna have to look at the query structure, but let's start with the simplest one, which is this, which is just match. Return all archetypes that contain all of the components in this composition. And that's very simple because we just say if archetype.contains composition, we add the archetype to the list and we just return the list. And what we also want to do, so we made that queries by archetype thing. We'll want to add this query to the archetypes list because we want to keep track of which queries reference an archetype. And then if the archetype becomes empty or it would never be destroyed, would it? So do we actually need to cache this stuff? I guess we might add an archetype. And if we're doing this by a cache, we would want to pre-check the archetype to see if it includes. Huh. This is kind of weird. This is kind of weird. I'm actually not sure how to do the cache for this. Shrippy asks, does Godot still have that problem where you get a bunch of errors when you move files? You used to drive yourself mad wondering why behavior was unreliable and why you got a bunch of parsing errors. You don't mean like when you're moving files like while the game is running. You're talking about like I have my editor, I've moved a bunch of files, and I've like broken a bunch of references by moving a bunch of files. I think that probably still exists, but it's one of those things where it's like, how are you moving the files? It's like, if you are moving the files inside the Godot file system, it works fine. Like, the Godot file system cleans up the references. If you start moving files in the Windows Explorer file system, I don't know if that works. I think that's going to break something. But I think at least from my experience, if you're only moving files inside the Godot file system, it's pretty good about cleaning up references, is my experience. Anonymous Gifter with the gift one sub to smooth into second. That's incredible. Thank you so much. Was there a sound file that played when that happened? I don't know why I'm putting my headphones on. Can someone just did this sound file play? Okay, good. Okay, good. That's what's supposed to happen. I've set up a new audio clip for OnGift Bomb, and I realized it wasn't for OnGift Sub. It'll only trigger if there's a gift bomb, but now I don't wear my headphones. Oh yeah. You've got access. You've got access. You can ship it. You can hold the door. You can do all of the things. Thank you, Anonymous Gifter. You're far too kind to this community. I'm gonna have to make new sub badges in a few months. I don't know what I'm gonna do. All right. So yeah, caching this is gonna be kind of tough because what do you do? How do you find the list of queries that correspond to your? Maybe you need a queries by composition. Because right now we're imagining we just have one query for each composition, but that's not totally accurate because of this whole containing idea. So if we want to cache this, we basically need to add archetypes to a query as the archetypes are created. We could theoretically remove archetypes when they're emptied, but I don't want to do that. I guess we would only do it while they're created. But the problem is an archetype might correspond to a bunch of queries. So we kind of need to know all of the... Maybe what we need is a list of maybe we need a list of all the queries that touch a component type. Maybe that's what we need. Yeah, let's do that. So this way we can have one query for each composition. So this is the query that corresponds exactly to a composition. But we also need a list of queries that include a component type. So we need private, read-only, dictionary, component. Should we just say component type or should we say component type.flags? We should say component type, just to make it clear what it is for now. List query. Queries by component type. That sounds right. That sounds kind of right. Blizzy, what is code? That is a deep question. That is an incredibly deep question. Welcome to the chat. I mean, it depends on what you're talking about. This is a natural language interface into a machine world so that we may commune with the machine spirit using a language that we understand. Truly baller coders are able to commune directly with the machine spirit in its own language. People who understand like assembly. But we're just doing our best. How's it going? All right, so how are we going to build this out? So we need to build out the queries by archetype and the queries by component type lookups. I feel like I need a new name system than this entity index map. I feel like it's not clear what this does because it takes an int and it gives an int. And like I understand kind of what its job is to do, but like I really need a name for it. All right. So when we create the query, okay, no, let's tackle this a different way. So we say we have this get archetypes. So this for each archetype and archetype by composition dot values. And this is the master list of archetypes. We say if an archetype dot contains this composition, we add it to this thing of archetypes. That is not wholly sufficient. So we need a copy of the query that is making this request. We need to turn this into body. So we need to add it to archetypes, and we also need to add, we also need to say archetypes. We need to say queries. Queries. Oh, so first thing here. First thing here, we can say query by composition dot add. Well, should we get archetypes composition? Maybe we call this query archetypes. So what if we already exist? What if we are already in this? Actually, let's operate on the assumption for now that we never do this after the first time. In which case, this doesn't totally make sense to be where it is, but that's not great. We probably want it to be more like resilient than that. We probably don't want to presume. So we can say if queries, if query by composition dot try get value, we can say if, we can just discard. We can just say if not. So if we aren't able to get this, oh, we don't need it to be like this. We can say query by composition dot add. Oh, that was right. Yeah, there we go. So if we don't already have this query in the composition, is there a triad? There's a triad. Let's just do a triad. You think you exist, Shrippy? I think you exist, but maybe none of us exist. There's really no way to know. Except to buy and consume and identify ourselves by what we buy and consume. That's really the only way to know that we exist, is to participate in, the great consumption. This episode brought to you by Corpo Overlords. RS. I don't know. All right, so we try to add the query to the query by composition if we've never had this query before. That's maybe more defensive than it needs to be. And then so we can do a similar thing here. So we can say queries by archetype dot triad. Archetype query. Oh, we're not trying. Well, wait, hold on. Here we need something more sufficient, I guess. We need. Let's not do that there. So when we create an archetype, we need to register it with this. We need to register it with queries by archetype. We need to add composition. No, we need to add archetype and a new list. Yeah. So we'll add a new list. That way we don't have to worry about any initialization. You're actually ChatGPT. Follows. That figures. All right, we gotta add start in a minute. Smooth into second asks, if you produce, does that make you a creator of existence? Only if you're producing for consumption. you're producing for its own sake, I don't know. I think then you're probably like an antisocial type. But if you're producing so that others may consume, yes, then you're like an apex predator in this ecosystem. I don't know. Go read Board if you want to be depressed by this stuff. We're just trying to make games. All right, so what are we doing? So we know queries by archetype has this archetype. So we'll say archetype. Then we'll say dot, is there a triad? No, there isn't, of course. Add query. I need some indicator here that this is only run once. I don't know. I don't love that we're not really defending this in such a way. We'll invert the if for the nesting issue. We're not converting this into a link expression. I never want to make any of this ever a link expression. Do not suggest to me link expressions. Shrippy's on the path. Shrippy's on the path to madness. All right, we're on ads. I'm going to refill my water real quick. I'll be right back. 1 second. Shrippy says the thing you like about making video games is it's like your own little world. Yeah, I think that's one of the main joys and draws of that sort of thing. All right. So yeah, I don't love that we're doing this in such a way because we're basically going to add this query. So maybe we just get the list. Maybe we get the list. Let's say we do something like this. We just say variable. We just say queries. Oh wait, no, we need to do this every time. So we can say variable queries. Well, hold on a second. Queries by archetype. So can I say like if queries isn't there a list like dot contains or something? Yeah, there is. Okay, contains query. Okay, this way we're at least protected against adding duplicates. All right, that's pretty good. It's reasonable. Take a little stretch break here. I think the new Indiana Jones game is coming out today. I'm kind of excited. It'd be like playing Uncharted, but like Uncharted for real. All right, so this is fine. So if the queries by archetype doesn't contain this query, then we'll add it. Roby flexing. Yeah, in the literal sense of the word. Yeah, I guess. Guess that's what I was doing. Why am I wearing my headphones still? Nothing's happening. It's such a deep instinct to me to put my headphones on as soon as I'm at my desk. Super weird to not be doing that. Kind of freeing, though. Kind of freeing. All right, so we get this list of archetypes. We return it. There's one other dictionary we made. What was it? Queries by component type. Fascinating. How are we going to deal with this one? Um, we need a loop. We unfortunately need to do this in a loop, which I don't want to do. Is there a reason to do this with a component type instead of just a flag? Not really. Except for just clarity. You have the same problem. You wear your headphones when nothing is happening. Yeah, I think that's weird to do. I think the only time that's okay to do is if you're in public. You just don't want to talk to people, but you want to be like aware of your surroundings. So you just like put your headphones on or put your earbuds in, but you just don't play anything. I think a lot of people do that as like a screening technique. I don't know why I want queries by component type. I feel like I had a good reason to do this. Oh, it's so that when we add a new archetype, we're able to figure out which queries we need to register with. Well, hold on. Maybe the easiest thing to do is just have a list of queries. And you just go, when you create a new archetype, you just go through the list of queries. I think maintaining this queries by component type dictionary is like more trouble than it's worth, probably. And so how would we even really use it? We would create a new query. We would go through the query's composition. We would say, we would say, so if you have this component type, You touch this query. So you would get the query, and then you would look at the query's composition, and you would say, does this include us? Do we contain this query? If so, you would add it. You would add the archetype, you'd add the new archetype to the list, and you would add it to each list for each component type. Oh no, you wouldn't do this part. This part we could do pretty easily. Okay, I guess that's a reasonable way to do it, because otherwise you would just need, that's a little better because you only have to look at the queries that at least have a component that's related to you. I wonder if the query should have a list of, the query itself should just have a list of archetypes that it's got registered. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe. Avoiding people on that level is crazy. I don't know. When you live in a big city and you ride public transit everywhere, I don't think it's that crazy. Like, I'm all for like being present enough to like help someone or like answer a question they have or something like that if they're trying to get around, but like a lot of the times that's not why people are talking to you on the street. A lot of times people are just being crazy, and it's kind of nice to just have the plausible deniability of, you're like, I've got my headphones in, I'm sorry, I'm not going to engage with you as you yell at me about something. But yeah, maybe it's a little antisocial. All right, so the way we do this, so the way we get this set up is when we create a query. Maybe we call it like register query or something like that. Maybe that's just part of creating a query. Yeah, we have a create query right here. So we can go through, so we can do that, and then we can go through for each component in composition, we just say queries by component type, component dot type. Is that a thing? No, not dot type. So we have a flag. So we say component type dot types component. That gives us the component type for a specific flag. And we just say that dot add query. That's not that bad. We only do this when we create a new query anyway. Do this 1 second, I guess, for no reason. All right, so now we can tell all of the queries that touch a specific component type. That seems useful. That does seem useful. Maybe there's like a graphing system we can use. I don't know. But let's say we're using that, so we're using this. But now when we create a new archetype, now we need to add this archetype, and we need to find the queries that correspond to this archetype, because we're going to do a caching system. Because caching archetypes should be pretty easy, because new queries and new archetypes are created, but they are never destroyed. So it seems reasonable to cache them. So when we create an archetype, right now we're saying queries by archetype. We're adding the archetype with an empty list of queries. But that's not sufficient. Well, no, that's not sufficient. We need to pre-populate this with all of the existing queries. And we're going to do that by going through. So we'll go through each component in our composition. We'll say for each component in our composition. And then for each of these components, we're going to basically say, we're going to get the type. So we're going to say queries do we then also say for each variable query in queries by component type, component type dot types component? So that gets us a list. So queries by component type, so we get a list here of queries. And then we go through every single query in this list, and we're basically going to do, we're going to say if archetype dot contains query. Maybe we should take a query for that contains. We don't have the ability at the moment, if we're doing it this way, we don't have the ability to do like optional components or like ORs, things like that. We're just like saying just operate on this straight up. And I think that's good enough for now. We can add some advanced functionality and probably change the way this works. So we don't actually need to have a function here. So, okay, so the query does have a list of archetypes. Yeah, that makes sense. That's what you want. Let's get a constructor. Let's make an explicit constructor because we want to say archetypes equals game world get archetypes. Get archetypes. Do we not call it that? Did I change the name? Oh, we were calling it query archetypes. We're only going to pass in the query. We're going to say query dot composition. We're not going to pass in the raw composition. We're just going to pass in the query. The query will use its own composition. Which does mean, though, that we need to assign the composition first. Then we can call this, we can say dot query archetypes this. Okay, that's reasonable. Now we're going to, so for each query in queries by component type for this component type, so we go through each component, we say if archetype.contains query, well, we could say query.composition. Probably easier to pass that through. Well, it doesn't really matter. Keep it like this for now. So if we do contain it, then what we're going to do is we're going to, we can just do this. We can say continue. Otherwise, so if it does contain it, then we need to say query, well, hold on. Hold on a minute. What are we saying here? What are we setting right now? I've let myself drift a little bit too far as where exactly on this process I am. I think we are keeping the queries by archetype set up. I think we're establishing this. I think we're making a list of queries that correspond to us. That's what we're doing. We're trying to keep this up to date. So variable, so we're going to make a variable here. We're going to say variable queries is a list. So we'll make a list. Oh, no, we'll say, oh, whatever. We could say is a new list of queries. So if the archetype does contain, if our archetype does contain the composition in this query, then we're going to say if queries, so we're going to say if queries does not contain, actually we could just say if queries contains, we could just have another continue. Otherwise we're going to just add queries. Actually, I guess this is fine. Let's do it this way. If this is just going to be one line, let's just do it this way. I prefer doing it this way. I prefer to affirmatively say that I'm doing something rather than be like, if not this and not that, then like whatever. But otherwise, let's do this. I prefer to just be like, if the query list doesn't contain this query, let's add the query. I prefer that than just if the query list does contain the query, continue. And then if that doesn't hit, then you just go to the next line. The next line says queries.add query. So I don't know. If it's a single line like this, I like this. I don't think it matters. And then at the bottom here, instead of adding an empty list, we're going to add queries. And so this should be fine. This should be a good way to What is this complaining about? Content of collection queries by component type is never updated. Okay, well, let's fix that. But this means we're able to update the queries when we introduce a new archetype. We have a bit of a problem where empty archetypes are going to kind of bloat our... Maybe we'll just have like an is empty check of some kind. Because we're probably going to have a lot of empty archetypes. Not a lot, but like enough, because we're using component tags, sort of. They're not exactly component tags because they're not going to be free of data all the time, but if you have components that represent states, then you tend to add and remove the states a lot. And you might have archetypes that, you know, all the archetypes are going to represent, these are the normal entities, but they're in this state. And so you're going to have a lot of archetypes that are empty unless an entity is in that state. And it might be a short-lived state. It might be a state that you're only in for one frame. You know, in which case you're like, well, why is this a component? But that's a separate discussion. All right, so we need to update this. So when we create a component type, when we register a component type, we need to add this. Do we have a register component function? I don't think we do anymore, huh? We shouldn't call it create component type because that doesn't make sense because the component type thing just does itself. It does it all itself. We just have a list of component types, which is pretty gross, but it's kind of the easiest way to do it. I might make a component type dot static thing here because we have a flags one. We have a component dot flags. We might have a component dot static. Wait, why is it component dot flags? It should be component type dot flags. Just because I don't want to make this thing enormous. So we'll have this list of flags. I almost kind of want to have another list that's the static. But I don't necessarily want it to include this. I have to decide what that's called and whether we want that in a separate script. That list of static members. That's just the permutations of actual component types. So let's just have like a register component function. Oh, wait, I was looking at that. I was looking at this. So we have a constructor. We have our component type constructor here. So we kind of need like a register component thing. We need like game.world.like register component type. Do we need this? Something like that. I like register more than create because it's where the creation is not happening here. So we're acknowledging that we're just like registering a thing that's been created elsewhere. So let's do that. Public void register component type component type component type. So we're just going to, it's going to be super simple. It's going to be queries by component type. We're just going to register it with a new list. So we're going to say queries by component type dot add component type and an empty list. And this could actually then just be an expression body or whatever. I wonder if there's anything else we'd want to do with registering a component type. I don't think so. All right, so we've got our queries by component type, got our queries by archetype, we've got our query by composition. So when we create an archetype, we record it, we match it to its composition, its full composition, then we go through its composition. We find each query that corresponds to the component type in its composition. If the archetype contains this query's composition, and if the queries doesn't already and if the queries list doesn't already contain this query, because we could match the query multiple times. Because if there's like two components, we'd match it twice. So we actually very much do need to do this check. So we add that query to the list of queries, and then at the end we just say queries by archetype. Add archetype queries. It's arguable that we should do this on the archetype itself. Like this should just be like a list of queries or a composite or a dictionary or whatever on the archetype itself, but I don't love that. We'll see how much we actually need to use this thing, and if we only really need to use it in the world, we don't need to use it anywhere in whatever. Archetypes and queries and excuse me, those are all classes, so we can move data around and it doesn't matter. I mean, it matters a little, but it's like whatever. This isn't like the hot performance path of like the code. This is like something we do every once in a while. And we do less and less of it over time. But this helps us cache our queries, which is good. Which is good. Oh, we do need to say query dot archetypes. Well, hold on. We would also need to say if not query dot contains, not if query dot archetypes dot contains archetype. Maybe we don't. Oh no, we do. We do need to do it this way. Yeah. We don't need to do both of these checks. These checks are implied to be the same check. So like if the queries doesn't already contain this queries list is per archetype. Same deal with, so we don't need to, so we can just say, okay, so now we will flip it. Now we will invert it because now we're doing more than one thing in response to this. So we'll say continue, then we'll say queries.add, query, and we'll say query dot, maybe do this in a different order. That should be fine. Because we only match the query to the archetype once. If they've already been matched, we skip both of these steps. So we only need to do the one contains check. Okay, and that's it for initializing the queries at the moment. That's all we have at the moment here. Kind of want to consider changing this thing, this contains. No, I guess that's more general. That's a more general test. I guess we can always have both. We can have this one, and then we can also have public bool contains query, query. And this one's just an expression. This one's easy. This one's just contains query.composition. All right, so we've simplified that a little bit. You can simplify this a little bit. This triad is a little suspicious here. There should only be one query with this composition, so we should never, this does not need to be a triad. This can just be add because we already do this check when we get a query. How do we call this? Yeah, get query. So when we get a query for a composition, we already check to see if there's a query for this composition. We either return the query or we create the query. And then when we create the query, we go through all of this stuff. We return the query. And then in query, we query archetypes. When we query archetypes, got to move this down because now it's not get anymore. It goes down here. Yeah, we just add it to the composition because if we're calling this, it's guaranteed that we haven't added the query to this yet. So easy. And then archetypes is a new list. Well, here's, okay, so this is, because this, we're doing this for We need to call this something else. We can call it like initialize query or something. Maybe like setup query or something like that. I like query archetypes because you're like, you pass in a query and you get out a list of archetypes, but there's an implicit state here, which is that you only ever do this once. Or there's an implicit, like, constraint that you only ever do this once. Should probably call it like initialize query. I don't know. Who cares? I guess we could call it like register query. That implies that it only happens once, huh? Then I should probably make it a void, though. We would say query dot archetypes equals archetypes. So let's set the composition, and then let's say game.world.register query this. That seems okay. This is a little awkward, and it's kind of bad form, the way I do this. But who cares? Make this nullable. It strictly is nullable. All right, what about this? Why is this a conditional? So we go through this register. We say, if this archetype contains this query, but if the queries by archetype for this archetype has not had the query added yet. So that would happen. So queries by archetype. Queries by archetype. Because we go through each archetype in archetype by composition. So we go through every single archetype once. That doesn't seem like the right way to do this. We should do something like what we're doing up here when we're creating a query, where we go through every component type. But then we would need like archetypes by component type or something like that. Or like archetypes with component. Maybe that's a worthy thing to have. Now we got a D reference of a possibly null reference here. We can just make it required. And then what is it happens over here? It just goes away. Okay. Yeah, maybe I don't understand the required keyword, but I'm using it. I'm using it. But get before set. Does it matter? Doesn't matter. All right, we have an error here somewhere. New query. Required member query dot archetypes must be set in the object initializer. I see. So we can't do it that way. Maybe we just accept the... Just a weird error. I don't want this error. Non-nullable member is uninitialized. I guess that's fine. I mean, it'll suppress nullable warnings with null not initializer. Oh, what's this? I don't want to do this in the whole solution. What's this quick fix? Okay, what did I do? I did something with this suppress nullable warnings with null not initializer. Yeah, whatever. I'll decide how I want to do that on a more general sense later. I'm okay with the warning for now. Because we know when we register a query, we get a list of archetypes back. I mean, I could just say archetypes equals gameworld.register query. I just do it like this. Do I really care? Probably the best of both worlds. You get a list of archetypes back when you register your query. I think that's fine. Now it won't complain. For each archetype, an archetype by composition dot values. So we're just checking every archetype. Yeah, I don't love that. I would rather go to a system like we have somewhere. Where are we actually using this? Ah, here we go. So we're saying like for each query in queries by component type. So instead of just searching every single query that exists, we're able to at least search the queries that are associated with the component types we're interested in. I feel like we should do a similar thing with archetypes. Like we should only search the archetypes that are associated with the components that we're interested in. We shouldn't search all archetypes. I think that's insane to do so. There's a little bit more upfront tracking, maybe going a little crazy on our lookups, but dictionaries are good. Dictionaries are very fast to look up. They're not that hard to maintain. I think they're okay. Is this a single? No, this needs to be a list of archetypes. So list archetype archetypes by component. That's fine. I keep going back and forth between calling this component type or calling it component. It's supposed to be very clear that it's not a component. It's like a component. It's like a special object that represents a type of component. So component type seems like the best word for it. But I don't know. We might change it. I do like a good pointless name refactoring. Okay, so we've got our archetypes by component. And we need to maintain this list whenever we create archetypes. We need to go through. Oh, this is called archetypes. Archetypes. That looked like it was a warning, but it was actually a misspelling. I was like, why is it only covering like the first like word? It looked like it was just like a different kind of compiler warning, but it was just it was just the spell checker. That's funny. All right, so when we create an archetype, we have yet another step to go through. But no, we're already doing it. So we already say for each component in composition. So we can do that. We can do that easily. We can just do it here. Because here we're saying for each query and queries by component for this component type. We can also just add this archetype to that. We can just say archetypes. Well, we should do something else first. So first, when we register a component type, okay, so this is no longer just a single line statement. So we need to say archetypes by component dot add component type. Let's call this archetype by component type. Archetypes by component type. I don't love it, but it's consistent. We're gonna be consistent. Important to be consistent. So when we register a component type, we make these lists. We register component types super early, so there should never be an issue. We do them at construction. When we construct, we actually do it statically, so we do it so early. Maybe we do it too early. If we do it before the world exists, then we have a bit of a problem. We might be trying to do this before the world exists. The game world. In which case, we do have a problem. When do we make the game world? Okay, so we make... Okay, no, we make the game world statically as well, so that should be fine. I don't know, we'll see. We shall see. So when we are going through these archetypes, we'll say archetypes by component type for component type dot types component add archetype. I think that's it. I think that's all we do to track this. Just when we create an archetype, we just put it in the list for each component that is in the archetype. And then when we are... Well, what do we do with this? Excuse me. We use this. We use this when we are registering our query. Yeah, that's when we do it. So when we register our query, instead of going for each archetype in archetype by composition, we do a couple of... this is going to be a nested loop, which is kind of not the best, but that's fine. So we're going to say for each variable component in query.composition. What did I do? I accidentally created a duplicate. So for each of these, we're going to say, so for each component, we're going to say for each variable archetype in archetypes by component type dot value dot values. Oh, yeah? What? Why is this a list? Oh, wait, no, we have to pass in the component. I'm an idiot. For this component. Oh, no, for component type dot types component. Okay, so for each of these, now we can do this part. We can say if not archetypes dot contains. Oh, so if this archetype doesn't contain our query, we continue. Otherwise, if So if not, what we want to do, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to add the queries by archetype deal. So we might have encountered this archetype before because, yeah, so if not queries by archetype, archetype dot contains query, continue, or no, if it does, so if this does, otherwise we will add this and we will add this. I feel like that's consistent with what we did below, or maybe above. Where else did we do something like this? Here. So we say like if the archetype contains the query, continue. Or if the archetype doesn't contain this query, just continue. If the queries already contains this query, just continue. Otherwise, query.archetypes. Oh, hold on. Query.archetypes. Oh, query.archetypes.add. Right. Yeah, that's correct. Okay. So similarly, down here, we're doing a similar thing where we're saying if this archetype doesn't contain this query, forget about it. If the queries by archetype already contains this query, forget about it. If otherwise, queries by archetype, add this query. And archetypes dot add this archetype. I guess we could just check this list instead of this list. Probably better to check the local first. Yeah, check the local list first. Yeah, let's do that. So we can do this a little differently. We can just say if archetypes contains. Oh, but we already checked this. Wait, what? What am I doing? Archetypes dot add archetype. If archetype, oh, I see. If archetypes plural dot contains archetype, continue. Otherwise, do this. And get rid of this. I think this is good. I think we're constructing our queries and caching them as we get structural changes as archetypes are added or removed. I think that's fine. I think the next thing we need is how the queries get the entity data and communicate it to the system. But I think we're going to do that tomorrow. I'm just about at time here. I've had a nice 3-hour stream. I got to get some lunch and then get back to my day job. But I'm pretty pleased, compared to the ECS part, this query part came together in like a day, at least the first half. He says having not tested any of it to see if it works. So maybe we'll figure out the implementation, we'll do some testing, do all of that during our Saturday stream here, which will be nice. It'll be fun. I think I'm kind of enjoying Saturday streams because I don't have work on either side. I kind of just do the stream on a day off. Thank you, Smooth. And yeah, I think that is it for today. Um, let's get some little outro music going. I don't know if I'm going to keep doing intro and outro music, but it seems weird to not do it. But yeah. Um, appreciate y'all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Hope y'all have a great end of your week here, and we'll be back tomorrow. All right. Bye.